So the Saracens are Muslims. The name means Sarakinoi, which means destitute by Sarah, because Sarah banished Ishmael, or at least by her causality, she had Abraham banish Ishmael. They are Muslims mainly from North Africa, and they invade through the sea now. They have naval capabilities. And in this process, they basically first take the island of Malta, which is right here. Then they take the island of what? What's this?
Sicily.
Sicily, good. They even get part of southern what? Italy. So you're going to start to get Arabic language and culture in Sicily, Malta, and southern Italy. They even, take a look, what's the big one? What's the big one? They even raid what city? Rome. Another sack of Rome, 846 AD. They sack Rome in 846. Poor Rome. You know, everybody, it's always a big deal. You got to sack Rome if you can. So, there we go. Now, one effect of this, what's the only effect is right there in bullet points. What is the main effect of this? They're going to stay there for a while, but what the main effect is that Sicily becomes one of the most multicultural places in Europe. You already know this. Who's been to Sicily so far? Sicily's always the one being banting back and forth. Give me some examples. Who's lived in Sicily already? Yes, Kate? Carthaginians, exactly. Or even more originally, even earlier than Carthage, what other people that the Carthaginians come from? What's the Phoenicians? Good. Carthaginians / Phoenicians. Who else, Blake? The Greeks. Yep, the Greeks were there. Who else? You said it, Grace. Romans, good. The Vandals. The Vandals were there. The Byzantine Empire was there. And finally, the Muslims are there, and it will be conquered again. It'll be conquered by the Normans. We'll talk about the Normans in a second here. So, that's it. That's all you have to know. Saracens get the Isles, they take to the sea, they raid Rome, but they're starting an Arabic culture and language in Malta and Sicily. And Sicily will always be known as the most multicultural place. And by the way, in a good way, too. They actually share ideas. They don't kill each other that often in Sicily like they might do elsewhere. All good? Can we move on now to the Magyars? Yes? Is this going too fast? Or people basically get it? It's like as long as you follow the book. Okay, Magyars. Magyars, well, let's look at the first interesting thing about them. They might be descended from who? Look at your bullet points. The Huns, exactly. Y'all remember those Huns? And that's definitely what the Magyars believe of themselves today. They are the new what? Since they're descended from the Huns, you can probably guess they're the new what? Horse people. They're going to come from the east as usual. These people always seem to come from the east. And they came in and they just began to raid. So this is our, let's label these real quick. So the red is our Saracens. And this brown is our Magyars. Was that?
On the outline you said violent twice. It was violent.
I know, yeah. There's two mistakes in the outline that I've seen so far. So you might want to cross out one of the violence. Or maybe I'm just emphasizing, because it's true. They had a reputation for great violence. Even today, by the way, the Hungarians of today really do believe that they're descended from the Huns. That's why it's actually called what? Hungary. And also one thing you should know, what do we call the Hungarian language today? Does anybody know what we in English call it? We just call it what? Hungarian. However, in Hungarian, it's called Magyar. I had to learn a little bit of Magyar. That's an anecdote, but it's probably worth telling you. One of the things I had to do in a former life is I had to take care of an old man who was Hungarian. And he was a bit senile. His mind was gone. He always spoke to me in Magyar, but I responded in English. I had no idea what he was saying, but he lost a lot of his mind. So he just didn't even know he was speaking Magyar. He's so used to it. But one thing he made me do is every time we brushed his teeth, we used Aquafresh toothpaste. And what color is Aquafresh toothpaste?
White, red, and blue.
Yeah, white, red, and blue, which happens to be, white, green, and red. I mean, at least as far as he's concerned. So he used to make me sing the Hungarian national anthem every time we brushed his teeth because it reminded me of the Hungarian flag, which is also white, red, and green. So I learned the Hungarian national anthem. And it's Magyar. The interesting thing about Magyar is no one knows where it comes from. It's, guess what? A language... Isolate. Yeah, it's not related to any other language. If there's a language it might be related to, it's Finnish of all languages. That's the most probable explanation, but even that no one's sure of. So here it is. Istene maga magyar, jó kedvel bőségel, hágyfejad a védakar, hogy fölava estendel, bazorzaki régem tép, hogy föladjen estendel. Well, I can't remember the rest, but it's something like so. And it's a very depressing song, actually. It basically says that, and I don't know Magyar, it's an impossible language. I only know two phrases that I actually know what they mean. But this one basically translates to, Hungary has suffered so much in the past that it's atoned for all of its present and future sins. It's a prayer to God, and it says that. But anyway, so these Magyars, they come in. They start going on a rampage. Let's go through this now. They go through Western Europe. They even get as far as Belgium and Spain. That's how bad they are. And someone needs to stop them. And the one who stops them is the king of the Eastern Franks. Now, at this time, what is the king of the Eastern Franks? Does anybody remember what that is? Yeah, it's Germany, basically, the king of the Germans. Now, we need to pause here for a second, and you want to add this. It's King Otto I. You all see that? King Otto I is going to be the one to stop them. We have to explain one thing. He is not Carolingian. He's what's called Ottonian. He begins a new dynasty called the Ottonian dynasty. But I do have to explain what's been happening ever since the last Carolingian died. The Carolingian line is dead by this point, 955 AD, which is the date you see there. So what do they do afterwards? Well, they did something different in France and in Germany. In France, they just picked another dynasty, and they just continued. But in Germany, they did something different, which is going to be supremely important for the next 900 years. What they did was the new way of electing a king, of making a king, is not by dynasty, not necessarily. It's an elective monarchy. Which, what does that mean? What do you think that means? There's how many rulers? One. But how do you make that ruler? Exactly, but not by popular vote. The stem duchies. What's called the stem duchies. Which basically means the most important, what would you call it? The most important counts and dukes. The most important nobles. Elect what's called the king of the Germans. That's what they call him. They don't call him king of Germany. They call him king of the what? I just said it. Of the Germans. Good. That's who Otto is. So you just be aware of how Otto is Otto. Otto is Otto because his fellow nobles elected him. Is that part clear so far? That Otto is an elected king. Got me? Good. Now Otto defeats the Magyars in the Battle of Lechfeld in 955 AD. I'm actually not quite sure where it is, but let's just do a ballpark guess. I'm guessing it's right about here. Okay? So he beats them in the Battle of Lechfeld, and he pushes them back. So they withdraw. They basically go back a little bit. And he says, look, you probably want your own territory, right? We've seen this before. Y'all remember those Masters of the Soldiers? So he settles them down, and the Magyars settle right here. Now, if you know any geography, and if you can, or if you just can guess, what modern-day country is that?
Hungary.
Hungary, exactly. That's the formation of Hungary. Now, there's two major impacts of this. First of all, the Pope was very proud of Otto. And so he decides to bring back an institution that had died a while ago. We talked about this. It happened first to Charlemagne, but it disappeared for a while. But the Pope decides it's time to bring it back. You all see it right there. Otto I was eventually crowned what again? Holy Roman Emperor. This has been gone since 924. Y'all can remember the very last slide, the last PowerPoint? I said the Holy Roman Empire disappears in 924. Does everybody kind of remember that? Yeah. It wasn't consistent. 800, 924 was fine, then disappeared. Well, this is a big deal because this is the official resurgence of the Holy Roman Empire, the continuous Holy Roman Empire. When people say, when was the Holy Roman Empire founded, there's actually two candidate dates. But let's do that first. Do this. Well, it's actually right there. I'm not going to write this down because it's right here. Does everybody see that? Otto was eventually crowned Holy Roman Emperor by Pope John XII in 962 AD. This is the official start of the Holy Roman Empire, although it's still called, notice, it's still called the what? Take a look at the notes. Still called the Empire of the Romans. But now the pattern is there. Does everybody see the part in parentheses? Here's our pattern from now on. Whenever a king dies, the nobles get together and what? They elect what? What are they allowed to elect? They're not allowed to elect the Holy Roman Emperor. They're only allowed to elect the what? The King of Germany. If that king is going to become HRE, which is almost always, he has to go visit the what? The Pope. Now do you see the pattern? This is the pattern from now on until the 1500s. After the 1500s, by the way, they just skip the Pope part. That's after the Reformation. Pope becomes less important. But up until now, that's going to be the way. And by the way, this gives a certain power to the Pope still. If the guys elect someone the Pope doesn't like, the Pope just says what?
Too bad.
Yeah, I'm not going to crown you. Sorry, that only happens 1 or 2 times. But that's the procedure. So let me put it this way. You got to remember that the king of the Germans is not automatically the Holy Roman Empire, but pretty much it's the same thing. Does that make sense? The Holy Roman Empire and the king of the Germans is the same thing. This, to tie it to modern history, by the way, this is why Hitler called his reign the Third Reich. What does Reich mean in German? It means empire, or reign, but probably a bit closer translation is empire. Because he saw himself as the third German empire. The first German empire was this one. This is the first German empire. Now again, they didn't call it that, they call it the Roman Empire, but it's definitely a thing. Well look, who becomes the Roman emperor? The king of what? Germany. So y'all following this here? That's why some people in Germany itself, when they do history in Germany, they call this the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation. I'm almost tempted to call it that myself, but it's actually not true. They didn't call it that, they just called it the Empire of the Romans. But y'all getting how the Roman Empire and the German Empire are kind of the same thing? Is that everybody getting that now? Which is very strange to us, but that's true. The second empire, by the way, was the German Empire of Kaiser Wilhelm, the 2 Kaiser Wilhelms. That's the second German Empire that Hitler saw himself as the what? The third. But now you know, this is the first German Empire, but just remember, is it ever going to be called the German Empire?
No.
No, good. You should be aware of that. It's just a Hitler thing. Yes, Sydney.
I thought the official start of the Holy Roman Empire was with Charlemagne.
Good, exactly. So here's the thing. When I said that when people ask you when's the start of the Holy Roman Empire, there's actually 2 possible answers.
Oh, okay.
Charlemagne is kind of the unofficial start. Charlemagne is the start that you see in retrospect. You're like, hey, wait, when did this thing start? Oh, this is kind of what happened with Charlemagne. But at the time, they had no idea what was going on. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So he's kind of the unofficial start. This is the official start, 962. Now, if I ask you, honestly, you can put either one. And I'm not going to ask that because it's complicated. But you just know that there's really 2 starts of the Holy Roman Empire. There's a false start and a real start. Does that make sense? Have we got that? Good. What happens to the Magyars? They settle down, as it says right there, and they convert to Christianity in 1000 AD. In 1000 AD, exactly, they become Christians with St. Stephen of Hungary, the Apostolic King of Hungary. Now remember, that's a big deal in the Middle Ages, because when do you start your history? When do you become an official kingdom, normally, in the Middle Ages? Yes, okay, Kate, she was first here. Exactly, when you become Christian. Now related to that, this is random, but I have to get it in somewhere, so I might as well get it in here. Similar thing happened a little bit to the north. Look at your notes. What happens to the north? What other kingdom forms for the exact same reason, only a little bit beforehand? Read it there. Poland, exactly. So you also have what starts out as a very small kingdom, but is going to get huge. I don't think a lot of you are aware of how big Poland's going to get. Poland was honking huge. Even today, it's rather big among European nations, but it's going to get huge. It's going to be huge. Poland also begins for the exact same reason in 966. So we're starting to see. The main thing you want to get from this course right now is how the nations of modern-day Europe are starting to slowly form. We've already seen France. We've already seen Germany now. We're seeing Hungary. We're seeing Poland. But that's mainly the thing. A lot of people don't do this, and so they're like, oh, Rome fell, and then so in the Renaissance, there's all these countries. Well, this is how the countries form. Good. Now, we're done with the Magyars. Are we ready to go on to the big one? Okay. Trying to think of the best way to do this. Let's do this. I have a video. I'm going to do the video. I just want to take a moment now to explain that part about the resurgence of the Holy Roman Empire and how it's very different from the Kingdom of France. So let's go back to Charlemagne again. Charlemagne, as you know, left an hereditary monarchy of his huge lands. However, they were following Salic law's old interpretation, in which all sons get a share of their father's holdings. Now, as you all remember, Charlemagne only had 1 son, but his 3 grandsons ended up splitting up his domains into 3 pieces, as you all remember. And the imperial title went into the Middle Kingdom of Lothair, but that one eventually completely disappeared and was absorbed into the Eastern Frankish Kingdom in 924. This Eastern Frankish Kingdom, of course, is basically Germany, and this Western Frankish Kingdom is, of course, basically France. And that's how we're starting to see the development of these 2 major nations of Europe. As a matter of fact, their languages start to change. The Western Franks can speak Latin, and that Latin eventually corrupts into modern-day French. And the Eastern Franks continuing speaking Frankish, which is a Germanic language, and of course that's why they're going to end up speaking several forms of German. Both kingdoms continued with their Carolingian kings for a while,
But in both kingdoms, the Carolingian line eventually dried up or just ended. The first one to go is actually the Eastern Frankish kingdom of the Germans, and that one dried up in 911 AD. Now, here, Germany did something very different from France or from the Western Frankish kingdom. The Western Frankish kingdom in 987 will eventually start a new hereditary monarchy. They just pick another dynasty and go with that, and it's just like we normally think of father to son, father to son. However, in Germany does something different. They elect a new king, but they do that forever now. Every time a king dies, the nobles of the basic regions of Germany, known as the stem duchies, there were 5 of them, elect their monarchs from now on. Now, they normally do elect the monarch that would be the heir anyway, but nevertheless, it is an elective monarchy. Now, technically, they elect what they called it the King of the Romans. However, we today tend to call it the King of the Germans. Either way, I'm just going to refer to it as the King of the Germans because that's basically what it was. It was the King of the German stem duchies. Nevertheless, in 962 AD, Pope John XII took it a step further because he crowned the current German king, Otto I, as Emperor of the Romans again. In other words, it's a throwback to Charlemagne. This was because Otto had done a lot to help Europe. He pacified the Magyars, who we just talked about. That was a major threat. The Magyars were very violent. But also because, like Pepin and Charlemagne, Otto had saved the Papal States from the Lombards once again. And this begins a new process now where the king of the Germans is basically identified with the Holy Roman Emperor. Basically, the stem duchies elect their king, who we call today the King of the Germans, but then the Pope is the one that crowns him as Holy Roman Emperor, or as they called it, Emperor of the Romans. Here, by the way, is a nice picture of Otto I. That's him right there, and this is him right here, and this is his wife, Saint Adelaide of Italy, because he also ruled a lot of northern Italy. So much, then, for the resurgence of the Holy Roman Empire and also for the formation of the kingdom of the Magyars. Now let's get to the third wave of migrations. Or rather, third group of migrations in this last wave of migrations. The Vikings were Scandinavian raiders who came by sea beginning in the late 8th century. Their specialized longboats and navigational skill made them a formidable opponent. Here's an example of their longboat. Another example, a real example, here's an actual one from the museum in Oslo, Norway. And here's a image, almost contemporary, from the Bayeux Tapestry. Now, using these longboats, they were able to sail both oceans and rivers. They showed up in several parts of Europe and caused terror in their wake. You could find them they made their way to France, even coming around the Iberian Peninsula and coming to Marseille. They also made their way even to Slavic Northeast and down the rivers to Byzantium. They even got to Byzantium. And then, of course, they really liked going to Ireland and to England, both from from the western part of England and directly from Denmark to the east. The reason they're so attracted to England was mainly because there were so many monasteries there, monasteries with precious metals, and monasteries are easy to kill because at this point monks aren't fighting. So here we have an example right here of them slaughtering monks to get their precious metals. Here's another example. You get the idea. These guys are not friendly. The complaints are really awful. They did some terrible things. The common petition at the time, it's an urban legend, but they say that there used to be a prayer, A furore norma norum libera nos Domine, from the fury of the Northmen, deliver us, O Lord. And even though that particular prayer is an urban legend, nevertheless, there was some truth to it. They really did, oh, by the way, I got to get my berserker in there. Here's a crazy Viking berserker. They really were a terror. Before I go from this slide, I should also mention that they even made it from Norway to Iceland, from Iceland to Greenland, and eventually all the way to Canada. They made it to Canada by 1000 AD, so they're pretty, they got everywhere. In 865, a particularly large Viking coalition, just give me a second here as I draw it, gathered, known as the Great Heathen Army, and they attacked England in around 870. Conquering most of eastern and central England. But King Alfred the Great of Wessex, the grandson of Egbert, then beat them in the year 879, and arranged with their leader Guthrum to give back half his land and to recognize Alfred's position as king of the Anglo-Saxons. So now we just remove the damage. They basically, all that goes away. Let's see, there we go. Thus Alfred both began the idea of one king of the English, that is, in his deal with the Vikings to be king of the Anglo-Saxons. He has another claim to be kind of the first king of the Anglo-Saxons, the first king of England. He also did a lot of, he basically, he also was famous for taking care of the Viking problem for now. The Vikings ruled themselves in a large portion of land known as the Danelaw. Here it is right here. That's what they gave to the Vikings. Eventually, the Vikings became Christian and they assimilated somewhat. In fact, words in English such as ill, anger, berserk, happy, and die are all words of Viking origin. Alfred also coined the term English as a way to unite the Anglo-Saxons, and he also promoted education and cultivation of the English language. Now, before we go on with England, I should just mention that this is a general characteristic of the Vikings, this pattern of being offered land, settling down, and assimilating. When Vikings were raiding on the seas, they were a terror, but when Vikings settled down, you wanted them. They normally organized very quickly and built a strong economy and political structure, forging new trade routes and creating strong administrative bureaucracies. They also tend to be very pious Christians once they were converted, with a very real piety and a very deep practical faith. So just to give some examples, just give me a second here. In 862, a group of Swedish Vikings led by Rurik had been offered rulership of Novgorod by the local Slavs. This would eventually become the Kievan Rus, the predecessor to Russia. Eventually they would convert to Orthodox Christianity, appreciating its heavenly liturgies. Then in 988, to commemorate that, the Vikings some other Swedish Vikings, after threatening Constantinople several times, they were offered a job by the Byzantine Emperor Basil II to be his personal guard, in recognition of the fact that they converted to Orthodox Christianity and were zealous Orthodox Christians. This highly effective bodyguard became an elite corps of the army, and became known as the Varangian Guard. So they're down there in the Byzantine Empire. Then, in 911, a band of Norwegian and Danish Vikings coming down the Seine, so here they are, they're Danish and Norwegian, coming down the Seine River, threatened to attack Paris, but instead, King Charles the Simple convinced them to take land in northern France instead. So here they are. This is Rollo. Duke Rollo was this Viking leader. They took this land in northern France, today called Normandy. They quickly settled there and married Frankish wives. They learned French, they learned the feudal system, and then they quickly executed it better than anybody else before them. They became the most efficient feudal lords of Europe. They also became skilled horsemen and are largely responsible for much of the medieval concept of knighthood chivalry. They became known as the Normans, literally the Northmen, and their land, the Duchy of Normandy. And finally, in 1016, a group of these very Normans from Normandy stopped by Galgano, Italy, on their way back from a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. So they went all the way to the Holy Land. Then on their way back, they stopped by Galgano, Italy. Galgano is this little heel of the boot in Italy. When they were there, they were shocked at the way that the local Lombards let the Muslim Saracens collect tribute from them. At this point, the Muslims actually had Sicily and some parts of southern Italy. So they offered their services to beat the Saracens back. And they did. They succeeded, and they beat the Saracens back out of southern Italy all the way back to Sicily. Eventually, they were rewarded by being granted a fief, but the thing is with these Vikings, with these Normans, as soon as you give them a fief, they begin to develop a strong foothold, and they invited all their friends from Normandy to come down. Yay, land in southern Italy. And eventually they took over all of South Italy, creating a very prosperous multicultural state. Multicultural in the sense that Lombards, Byzantines, Muslims, Normans, and even Jews were all there together living in this southern state. At one point, they even beat back the Pope's forces in battle. They basically, oh, sorry, just give me a second here. I didn't mean to draw that line. Can't get rid of it now. I don't know why. But anyway, they beat back the Pope's forces in battle, and they apologized right afterwards. They said, yes, we're faithful Catholics, we love the Pope, but it really is our land, Holy Father, if you just would recognize that. The Pope was so impressed with them, he legitimized their holding on southern Italy, and that began what was called the Kingdom of Sicily, because eventually they also conquered Sicily. So the whole Norman kingdom of southern Italy was called the Kingdom of Sicily. That's just to make a point that this is the basic trend of the Vikings.